So hello, today we're at St Michael's and All Saints Church in Copford in Essex, and we're going to talk about the history of the church and the village itself. So Copford is a village in Essex. It's 5 miles from Colchester and it's 1 mile from Marks Tay. So Copford is surrounded by Essex farmland. The elevation is 40 metres or 131 feet in old money, and today's population is around 1,791. Copford had a settlement here from the Bronze Age. The Romans even built a villa here, and when you walk along Hall Lane, you walk on an ancient Roman track. Stanway Bridge. Now long ago Copas, the man, controlled access here, where Roman River crosses London Road above. It was known as Copas Ford in 995 AD. Today the village is simply called Copford, 1028 years later. The Saxons of Copford. Now the Saxons made good use of Copford, building 2 manors here. In 995 Aelfric gave his lands to the Bishop of London, Aethelstan. I read that in this year a comet star appeared in the sky. Copford Manor of 1066. Now Copford Manor, as it was known, was just north of today's church. Close by lived 14 smallholders and 3 slaves and 10 freemen. Which makes me believe there was a religious establishment here back then, and the 10 freemen were perhaps monks. Copford Hall. The bishops of London would use Aelfric's land wisely and build a manor here, where Copford Hall stands to this day. Each bishop in turn would reside here until 1540, when Edward Bonar, London's last Catholic bishop, was granted this hall as his private residence. Bishop Bonar would serve Henry VIII, and under the reign of Mary Tudor, Bonar was notorious in his persecution of Protestants who would not recant to Catholicism. By 1626, John Haynes would purchase Copford Hall. He would later leave for America and become governor of Massachusetts. His son Robert would inherit this hall in 1654. Only 3 years later, sadly, Robert would die of disease so infectious that when laid to rest in his coffin, his servants also succumb. Next in line would be Robert's brother Hezekiah. He was a major general to Oliver Cromwell in England's Civil War. And so old Copford Hall would pass down the line of Haynes until 1763. Some history, I think you'll agree. Where we now stand, Copford's second Saxon manor once stood, owned by a freeman in 1066. Now, by 1086, the Norman Hugh de Montfort, Constable of Normandy, was tenant-in-chief here. Hugh supplied 50 ships and 60 knights to William the Conqueror for his invasion of England. And by 1208, William de Bottingham was lord here. His son Hugh would give land to Copford Church in 1225. Copford's Greens. Copford's ancient woodland was cleared many centuries ago. To form 3 greens, and amazingly they survive to this day. We shall start with 8 Ash Green, today a village of its own right, first mentioned in 1463 when a well was dug nearby. Mulberry Green, mentioned in 1776, but it's much older. Now Rectory Road, where we stand, wraps itself around Mulberry Green's bend. Today the green is surrounded by farmhouses. Copford Green. Now Copford's Green was first mentioned in 1467 and still catches your eye as you pass through. You will see the 17th century carts lodge. So it was used to stable carts, wagons or perhaps horses. Above we have a hayloft and a thatched roof. You can still see the old door. Still see the original timbers, look. Incredible, isn't it? If we look there, we can see the original pond for the cattle and horses. So cart lodges in Essex are incredibly rare. Notice how the old building leans. Just imagine the stories told under these very timbers. So now we've made our way to the Alma Inn. This was built in 1860 and originally it was a house with a brewery out the back and a shoemaker's. Now by 1870 it was trading as the Alma Inn. And from what I can see it's named after the Battle of Alma. We've obviously got a very good sense of humour here. Now by 1908 the Alma had become a free house, meaning it was free to decide what alcohol it sold. And today the Alma Inn is central to the community of Copford. Copford Green's oldest building, first mentioned in the year 1400, is called Vineyards. This incredible old house dates from the 15th and 16th centuries. Bishop Boner's Walk. Now tradition still remembers a walk between an avenue of trees, commonly known as Bishop Boner's Walk. Now the trees have long gone and the land returned to field. Look at this glorious weather. So before we enter, look upon this Lytch gate. For it was built as England entered the blackouts of World War II. Now it is dedicated to Captain Cyril Harrison by his wife. Now the Harrisons have held the lordship here since 1763 at Copford Hall. Now a Lytch gate would give mourners shelter from the elements, and traditionally this is where the coffin of the deceased would start their journey. So now we have made our way to St Michael and All Angels Church. Now before 1880 was known as St Mary the Virgin's Church. Now St Michael's is built from rubble, Roman brick and medieval bricks, and most of what we're about to look at dates from the year 1120. This church is unique in many ways and is regarded as one of the finest Norman churches in the whole of England. Now immediately south of this church, Saxon foundations were found of a much earlier church. It's thought the bishops built this very church as a private chapel when staying here. So let us begin with the south porch itself. In 1877, a Colchester builder dismantled the rotten 15th century porch and rebuilt this faithful replica in its place. I think it's quite impressive. Okay, let's have a look inside. So around 1877, Henry Woodyer, a Surrey architect, was employed by Copford Church to carry out renovations. So if we open up the bird screen, so the original 12th century door was moved to the north doorway where we look now. Oh, isn't that something spectacular? And this fine door was fitted in its place, and notice the fine decorative ironwork. So okay, let's go inside and have a look. So as usual, I'll take my cap off and shall enter. So now we stand in the nave itself, built in 1120, and that's 903 years ago. 903 years. Now, if we look on the ceiling, there's a huge display of paper angels, which I believe they're taking down now, and have been up since Christmas. So if we move around, we can actually see the south doorway, which I always like to capture. Now the interior retains its original wall paintings, giving a good impression of what a church would have looked like in the time of William the Conqueror and the Normans. So let's talk about abutments, which once supported the barrel vault ceiling above. So if we look here, we can see the ceiling would have gone like so. Now, around the year 1400, this timber roof was installed and they removed the barrel vaulted roof or ceiling. Which we can see more clearly from this angle. Let's talk about the vault doorway. Now, there was a chamber above the vaulted ceiling, and it was entered by a now blocked doorway in the north wall, which we look upon now. And I believe it's just up there. Can you imagine perhaps the church warden entering the vaulted chamber, a type of storeroom? Okay, let's have a look at our first painting. Samuel and the Lion, our first Norman painting and most original. This painting is 900 years old. And notice the Norman knight. In chainmail from the time of the First Crusades. So over to the South Bay, our first painting of Jesus. Well, I'm assuming it's Jesus. Okay, now we shall move on to this pulpit. Now, this fine pulpit was carved by Mr. Peters of Antwerp of the Netherlands in 1886. Notice the finial of St. George slaying the dragon. Okay, you know I can't resist climbing the pulpit. Now, in the 14th century, this fine painted bay was added to let more light in. Above we can see this round-headed window which displays influence of Roman architecture. Perhaps the Roman villa was nearby. Now we have this fine eagle lectern, which I have no information on. Let's look at the detail that the carpenter has put into this. Now we shall move on to this fine memorial on the wall. This is a memorial to Robert Tunstall of 1925, who was a schoolmaster and churchwarden here for 40 years. And here we have a fine carved hymn board carved in English oak. Now this is dedicated to Brian Harrison, Church Warden of 2011. Now we look at this fine candle holder. So St. John said, "In him was life, and the life was in the light of men." Now we look upon the Rood screen. This magnificent 15th century Rood screen is carved in oak. It is possible that Bishop Boner himself had this removed to the nearby barn during the English Reformation, where it stayed until 1832. So now we shall enter the chancel itself. So this was built at the same time as the nave to form one structure in 1120. So we look just in the corner there, we have the original priest door. Can you imagine the bishops of London entering through this door for the next 580 years? It's just incredible, isn't it? If we look above, we can see the Victorian opening which was created with the stained glass. So around the year 1190, this bay and arch was built to access the south chapel, or was it the south transept? If we look above, we can see Empress Matilda, who was the daughter of Henry I. Now, Matilda was crowned empress in Rome's St. Peter Basilica in 1116. Just think about that, 1116. Now we face the apse, popular in early Christendom, from ancient Greek meaning the arch. Now this Apse Arch is the most unaltered part of this church. Isn't it something else? Now notice the signs of the zodiac, very popular during the 12th century in Europe, but in England very rare. Now we look above at the semi-dome vault built in 1120 of the apse. Notice that there are no vault ribs to allow the display of the mural paintings. So who painted the apse? Well, my curious mind pondered who painted this church and who was the bishop at this time. Well, the experts have suggested Hugo of Bury St Edmunds, a master painter from 1136 to 1148. It's likely Hugo travelled across the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Land. So, Bishop Chancel of Bury St Edmunds was Bishop of London at this time, so a strong contender. His father went on the First Crusade to the Holy Land, never to return again. So, when were they discovered? In 1690, the walls were whitewashed. While scraping, builders discovered the face of Christ. In 1871, the rector's wife, Mrs. Wood, convinces her husband to remove the limewash. And they call in Daniel Bell, who restores the Apse paintings in 1872. There are over 30 paintings, including there are over 30 paintings, including priests, saints that are soldiers, and saints. And yet there's more. Look at this. It's incredible. Everywhere you look, paintings. Is that St. Peter? I'm not sure. With a cross? So dominating all else on the vault of the apse is Jesus Christ. Jesus sits on the throne and is encircled by rainbow and angels. So can you just imagine the 49 bishops of London seeking solace and admiring these paintings? Can you imagine the builders mixing the lime wash here in 1547? The builders of 1690 exposing the face of Christ and calling for the priest. Reverend Wood and his wife looking up in awe in 1872 as Daniel Bell removes the scaffolding. And here we have the south window dedicated to Harriet Tatch. Look at the beautiful windows around. This is the east window. And again, just look at the window jambs. Incredible paintings. This window is also dedicated to Harriet Hatch. And we can look over at the north window itself. Painting of Joseph. I think it's really good. Just wondering if these paintings, some of these characters, are based on people the artist knew. Now we've made our way into the South Chapel. It was built in 1190 when additional space was required. It's likely this chapel was dedicated to St Catherine or St Mary the Virgin, and their statue would have stood here. Now we look upon the World War I and World War II memorial. Seem to be seeing more of these across the country now, where people paint stones. And above we can see the fine oak board itself, which lists those who made the ultimate sacrifice. So here we have a couple of unusual features. Just look at the unusual sort of plaster work around the edges of the bays. And if we go back to this panel, which is quite unusual, So please spend some time reading this panel. It celebrates 1,000 years of history from the years 995 to 1995 of the parishes of Copford and Easthorpe. And if you go over to this cabinet, you can actually purchase one of these fold-out copies of the actual panel itself. So it's quite impressive. So also I noticed this carving. If we turn it over, it says, we can see that, the rise in the quality of work that a man produces is inevitably followed by a rise in the quality of that man. Here we have the south window, which has given me so much interest at the moment. So this window is in memory of Philip Wright of 1871. Now, when I looked up 1871, Scotland beat England 4-1, the very first rugby international game. Okay, let us look at the South Aisle Arch. So we have moved forward to 1290. The South Chapel was extended once more. Behold how the builders have used Roman bricks forming the outer arch. Now the inner arches used some of the earliest bricks made in England at that time. Just imagine as the bricklayer left them in 1290. So as you walk through the south aisle, you'll come across this incredible chest. Just look at that. Now, Copford's strongbox shows off 14th century craftsmanship. It has got an incredible 16 iron straps which overlap 3 in horizontal formation. We can still see the original lock for the priest, or possibly bishop, and 2 church wardens. And we can also see that a huge horizontal bar would have gone all the way across. Imagine, if you can, the bishops and priests locking away documents and valuables for safekeeping. And also we can see where funds were raised in the original slot right here. So as we leave the south aisle itself, we pass these memorials. This one is from the 1700s, and it's got various families connected to the Sturgeons of Copford and Birch villages. Next we have this fine marble memorial. Now this is dedicated to Catherine, the wife of Hezekiah Haynes, Esquire, who was Lord of the Manor of Copford. The Haynes family ancestors were governors of both Massachusetts and Connecticut in America. So yes, when you do visit, please fill out the visitor's book. It's always good to see who's been here. And you can give donations into the wall. And we've got a list of postcard prices there. If you wish to purchase any postcards, they've got a various selection here. There's also a booklet of the church and the actual plan which I showed you earlier. And it looks like a lot of churches have got books, DVDs, etc. for sale or loan, I'm not really sure. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to just have a look closer at this door, which is Victorian, but it's still impressive. The hinges. Boner's coffin. An interesting saga is attached close to where we stand. For in 1809, workmen found a lead coffin under the north side of the altar. A nameplate simply read Edmund Boner. Now, Edmund Boner was in fact the last Catholic Bishop of London, serving Henry VIII and Mary Tudor. For Boner had spent his last 10 years in a London prison. When he died in 1569, his coffin was buried at midnight to avoid a riot. So hated was he by the people. Okay, let's walk now towards the Belfry itself. So just have a look at this most impressive 15th century belfry. The builders used some mighty timbers. You can just make out the ladder there to get access to the bells. Just to give you an idea how thick this timber is, over a foot thick. It goes all the way up. So now we're going to look at this font. So just imagine how many folk have been baptised right here in Copford on this very font. For this Purbeck marble font is original and Norman. For it would have been cut in Dorset in the 1100s. And right next to the font we have the Ellicombe chimes. Now, St Michael's Church uses a rare Ellicombe bell ringing mechanism to ring its bells, allowing one bell ringer to control 3 bells above. And you can watch my video at Goldhanger's Church and see it's in action, or a similar one in action. And if we look above, we can see the ropes going all the way to the top of the belfry. So our very last window of this lovely church is the west window. Now this window shows St Michael and St Gabriel. So this clearly shows Michael with the scales of justice and the mighty swords. There's no messing with Michael. So now we look upon Gabriel. Look at the detail, the feathers and the gown. Okay, now we shall leave this lovely old church, and I hope you visit sometime. Just before we go, I just wanted to look at this. There's always something more I want to show you, but look at that. It's just antiquity all over, isn't it? Let's talk about bells. So this amazing church has just 3 bells, but they are some of the oldest in Essex. John Bird cast one in 1420 and only 19 survive. William Chamberlain cast our second bell in 1440, also from London. Our last bell was cast in 1574 by Land and Draper of Thetford. Now let's have a walk around the outside. And you will notice a huge amount of Roman brick, which undoubtedly came from the villa here. So it's quite interesting because if you look on the outside, you can see where the Chancel structure is. We've got the south aisle, I guess, here, and then if we follow it around, we can see where the apse is built. Now the apse is very interesting in itself because we can see Roman coins running down the side. And And if we look further on down, we can see some Roman bands of bricks. Now the Romans used this technique of a layer of rubble and then a layer of bricks, giving great strength, and I suspect the Normans observed this from the villa walls they dismantled. So okay, we should continue. So you can clearly see how close the hall is, just there. Now, one of my favourite discoveries here, a recess in the hedge to Copford Hall. Can you just imagine the lords, ladies and bishops making their way from Copford Hall to the chancel through this very door? Quite impressive, isn't it? So now we have made our way to the north doorway itself. The doorway itself has two scallop capitals. Just to think that these are Norman. Above the top we can see an ashlar monolithic lintel, and above that we've got Victorian titanium pattern bricks, and then above that we have an arch in Roman brick. This is the original south door, moved with a loss of most of the original ironwork. Now in 1690 an old Copford man heard this of his master, a tale of a Dane and this very door, and he said, "Went thither and found a sort of tanned skin underneath the said ironwork." Now local legend states that a Dane was flayed for stealing from here, and that his skin was nailed to the church door, a warning to others. Truth behold, it was likely that a poacher had met his sad end, but either way, some poor soul. Now if we look from the west side, if we look at the top section just below the belfry, we see a window which is believed to have been once a door that led out onto a balcony, and that perhaps holy relics or statues were brought out to the crowd below where we stand now. Now a further interesting feature of this church are the two round windows, and these, it's believed, let in light to the vaulted chamber above. Either way, it's fascinating. So St Michael's and All Angels Church carries out baptisms, weddings and funerals. This wonderful church is open daily. I do believe that the choir are looking for volunteers, and there's various social events going on here. The other thing I'd like to point out is I've actually been calling this church All Saints, and I just don't know where that's come from. And it was only at the very end today it's been pointed out to me it's actually All Angels. So apologies for that. Thank you very much.